awesome. And today I want to talk about some of the process that I've learned from Abraham about finding the awesome. I said that, a couple weeks ago, I said I started this whole thing with in mind that I asked God to give me a word for the church, and I also asked God to give me one word for myself. The word for the church was this word, lights, and that we were going to take our light somewhere. And so I've been praying that God would reveal how we're going to do that. And the word he gave for me was focus, and this idea of focusing on the awesome and finding the awesome in just everything that I do and everywhere I'm at, that I could focus on that awesome. So that's kind of where this whole thing kind of began, is that this word that God gave me at the beginning of the year. And when you think about the beginning of the year, you also think about new goals and this. How many made New Year's resolutions? I'm curious. I think I asked the question. Not anybody really did, right? Most people have given up on the idea of New Year's resolutions. But at the beginning, I always kind of take inventory, and I kind of always set some goals for the year. And I've asked God to just show me the awesome in everything. And what does that cost? What's it take to find the awesome? And, and I wrote things like, things that you would normally write down, like spending more time with the Lord, or surrendering every part of my life, or serving in a way that I've never served before, or stepping out in faith in ways I've never stepped out before. So that's kind of been this process for me. But I went to this passage in Genesis chapter 12, and I want to look at the life of Abram. He has not yet become Abraham, but he is just being called out. So look at Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you." What are the two words there? It says what you're going to what? Leave and go. Leave and go. So he was called out of some place that was very comfortable for him. We know that Abram came from money. He was prosperous. And he was in a land, in this place called Ur. Ur is in Mesopotamia, and it's in the area of the Chaldeans, probably somewhere around Babylon at that, before all that took place. But it was very prosperous. What we know about that area is that probably over 200,000 people had settled there. It was kind of a big city for that time. As a matter of fact, people would probably go visit. TripAdvisory would tell you that it's a great place to visit, okay? You would buy one of those I Heart Ur shirts, when you go to visit there. It's that kind of place. It's a place of comfort. There's one of the things I know that people like to do when they buy a house. Some people like to do when they buy a house. They want to buy a house that's kind of far enough from some things, but it's close enough. So convenience of a store or a mall or things like. This would have been a place of comfort for him. This would have been a place where he has been very, very successful. And so God is calling him out of a place of comfort, a place where his family is, a place where he knows people, a place where he's been prosperous, and says, "Follow me." He doesn't even tell him where he's going to go. He just promises him a place that God is going to give him. And so Abram has to decide whether he wants to step out of his comfort zone and follow God or stay where he is. See, I think if you really want to find the awesome, if you really want to see God in everything, you got to get out of your comfort zone. So many of us sit in places of comfort, and that's one of the reasons why we don't see the awesome. Because everything around us has become too comfortable for us. See, even this church, since it was built in 1853, it's our little place. It could become a place of comfort. We could start just getting comfortable being here together because we like each other, and not think about where God wants to take us. So the challenge here for me is, God, how do we get out of this place of comfort for this church? How do I get out of my own way? How do I get out of my comfort zone? I like comfort. No one likes comfort more than my son. My son turned 25 today. Today's his 25th birthday. But when he was a kid, he was the king of blankets. He called himself the blanket king. He had the most comfortable blankets in all the house. For Christmas, he asked us, Santa, to give him the most comfortable blanket that money could buy. That was on his list. He didn't care about games. He didn't care about anything else at that time. He just wanted the most comfortable blanket and the most comfortable pajamas you could have. That was the top on his, I mean, he must have been like 7 or 8 years old. He likes his comfort. And then he would put on his pajamas, he'd get his most comfortable blanket, and he would just cuddle up on the couch, man. He loved his comfort. He was the comfort king. He was the blanket king. That was my son. But when I think about my son, I also think about some of us who like that kind of comfort. We like, now as he's older, his place of comfort is now on the couch. And he sits on the couch in his Snuggie. You remember the Snuggies? I don't know who got rich off this idea of taking a robe and turning it around. Because that's all it is. It's a robe that you put on backwards. But somebody made a huge amount of money by making a robe backwards and calling it a Snuggie and everything. Oh, this is a great idea. I like my blanket. Now I've got some. Just take your robe and turn it around and put it on. It's the same thing. Anyway, here he's got this, he's got his Snuggie, he's got his blanket, and of course now it's the PS5. And all his favorite games, and he loves to sit in front of his TV with his PS5 playing. That's his place of comfort. Matter of fact, I got a couple pictures here. This might remind you of comfort right now. Is this anybody? John, do you have one of these seats in your house? Yeah? Do you have a place where you put your drinks and everything's kind of, your books are there, whatever it is that makes... Yeah, it does? Okay. How about this one? No one loves comfort more than Linus, right? Oh, how about it? Who's got this kind of chair? Anybody got this kind of chair? Yeah, all right. These are very comfortable. It was really big when I was in college was to have one of these. I don't even know what they're called.
Papazon.
A what?
Papazon.
Papazon? Sounds like a pizza place. Papazon pizza, all right? Anyway, and what else do we like? Our comfort food. Somebody tell me what your comfort food is. I'm just curious.
Pea soup.
Pea soup?
Homemade pea soup.
Homemade
That's my
pea
mac
soup.
and cheese.
I like pea soup. I prefer broccoli soup over pea, but it's kind of the same. Anyway, what else is comfort food? Just curious.
Guacamole.
I love guacamole. My daughter-in-law makes the best guacamole. I don't know, it's a simple recipe. I can't get it quite right, but when she makes it, I just power it down. Anybody else? Comfort food.
Fried chicken.
Oh, who doesn't like fried chicken?
Eggs, any kind of eggs.
What?
Eggs.
Eggs?
Fixed anyway.
Really? Well, so we like our comfort foods. We like our comfortable place. As a matter of fact, when you leave this service, most of you will go back to your homes, to your comfort food, and you'll sit in your comfort place, right? At least I'm going to, because there's a game on that I want to watch. But when I think about this is exactly what was going on in Abram's life. He got so comfortable with his position, his place, the people he was around. It was completely familiar to him. And the problem is that when we get to this place of familiarity and success, we start losing the ability to find the awesome. We start finding the awesome in the things we can do rather than what God can do. Comfort can be an enemy to us. As a matter of fact, I put in your notes, growth begins where comfort ends. Growth begins where comfort ends. And for Abram, he was called out of a place of comfort to a place that he didn't even know where he was going. And he was taken out of his place of comfort. And that's where growth began in his walk with God. Growth begins where comfort ends. As a matter of fact, I've got in your notes there a couple of statements that I kind of stolen. This quote from a made-up character, Dooley. It says this: "The job of the newspaper is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable." One of the most famous quotes about the press comes from this fictional character, 19th century Irish bartender named Mr. Dooley. And then Caesar Cruz says this: art should bring comfort. Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. I've heard pastors say the same thing, and they use these phrases because they said that the thing for a pastor is to comfort those who need to be comforted and make uncomfortable those who are too comfortable. So this morning, I'm kind of trying to pull you out of that comfort zone. This is exactly what I'm trying to do, is to try to pull you out of this comfort zone. Because let me say this, and I'm just going to be honest with you and be real with you. In a church like ours, we kind of like our crowd now. You are my family. When I need something, I go to you. When I need prayer, when I need advice, I go to you. When I want to go hang, as a matter of fact, I don't hang out with anybody really, and now I think about it, I really don't hang out with anybody that isn't part of this church. I don't think that I really have much friends outside this church. This becomes very, very comfortable to me. As a matter of fact, when we were talking about not having church this morning because of the snow, I thought, okay, I gotta, that's where I get my fix. That's where my friends are. That's where my family is. And in this kind of small building, this kind of feels extremely comfortable. The danger is, if we get too comfortable, we'll never be the lights that God has called us to be. We'll never step out in faith where we need to step out. We'll never experience awesome if we stay here. And like I put in your notes, growth begins when comfort ends. And he took Abram out of his comfort zone. And the first thing he did was stop talking and start walking. Because that's what he says, leave and go. So we got to stop talking and start walking. We can talk all we want about wanting to reach Carmel. I've talked about it for a couple of years. Then COVID hits and stuff. We start to get plans together. We start working on Celebrate Recovery. We start moving out that direction. But the moment COVID hits, we kind of get back into our little comfort zones a little bit. That's one of the things I think has been so dangerous about this last year. And Satan loves this. Many people will not return to church this year. Even when COVID is over, they will not return to church this year because they've gotten too comfortable sitting at their home and watching it on TV. God has never asked you to be comfortable. He's asked you to step out in faith. Last week we talked about this. He gave you the Great Commission. To take the gospel. That means we have to go. Wherever you go, take the gospel to the uttermost parts of the world. Make disciples. Baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. He's asked us to go. And he asked Abram to step out of his comfort zone of Ur. The place, the metropolitan, where he was successful, where he had family, where everything around him was comfortable. To step outside his comfort zone and just follow him. To stop talking and start walking. The second thing I put in your notes is this. Oh, let's finish with Genesis chapter 12, verse 4. It says this, and I love this because this is exactly how he responded. So Abram, what's the red word? Departed. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left for Haran. When he left Haran. 75 years old. So he departed. We're going to get to this Haran thing in just a second. Because it's interesting, he leaves Ur and he goes to a place called Haran. And we'll get there in a minute. But he was 75 years old when he left there. Just keep that in mind. The second thing I want you to understand is that stand on God's promises. Look what it says in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, this is what we just said, leave your native country, leave your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land. And listen to what it says. I will what? And I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous. You will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who with contempt, or treat you with contempt, and all the families on the earth will be blessed through you. Do you see how many times I underline either will be or I will? These are promises. God gave Abram promises. He said, I'm going to show you, but he listens, I will show you, I will make you into a great nation, I will bless you, you will be a blessing, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who treat you contempt. And you will be a blessing through you. He gave them all kinds of promises. We have 7,000 promises in the book. Your Bible has 7,000 promises. So when you step out of your comfort zone, you step into God's promises. I'm going to say it again. Growth begins where comfort ends. I'm just going to ask you the question. How many of you become too comfortable in your life, too comfortable in your faith, and you haven't stepped out on anything for a long time? You want to find the awesome? Step out of your comfort zone and begin to step into God's promises. He said He'd never leave you nor forsake you. How many believe that promise? If He never leave you or forsake you, you could do anything, right?
Amen.
He said you're more than conquerors. How many believe that? He said, greater is He that is in me than he that is in the world. How many believe that? What? If that's true, it should propel you to do things that you never do on your own. Walk up to somebody, a stranger, and share your faith. Or give money that you don't have to someplace else because you know that God's going to supply your needs. Because the Bible promises that He will supply all your needs. Where from?
From His riches and glory.
From His riches and glory. These are promises. See, we stay comfortable because we don't believe the promises that God has given us. The moment that we step out of our comfort zone, we can start stepping into the promises that He's already. You're going to see awesome things happen. You can step into the awesome the moment you step out of your comfort zone. I'm just telling you the truth. This is something God's really been laying on my heart. And I'm talking, if it feels like there's a finger pointing at you right now, please don't take it that way because there's three more pointing back at me. I'm taking this very personally. So I wrote down two things in your notes there. Our promise and our participation. So we have all kinds of promises that God provided the promises. It's our responsibility to provide the participation. See, Abram never had to leave Ur. It was comfortable. He could have had a very long, very healthy, very successful life in Ur. God took him out of his comfort zone, put him on a road to where He promised, and as he's stepping into these promises, listen to the promises that He's given him. He told him that He would show him great things, that he'd be a great nation, and He will bless, and he would be famous, and he would bless others, and those who would curse him, he would curse those and that cursed him, and that He will bless him, and that all the families on earth will be blessed through him. These are promises. These are huge promises. So God provides the promise, but we have to step out in faith and provide our participation in the promise. You'll never find the awesome until you're obedient. That's the bottom line. You will never see the awesome until you're obedient. Third thing I wrote in your notes is this. Just keep going on. Just keep going. Just keep going. First thing, when I wrote that down, the first thing I thought of was Nemo. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. Listen to what it says in Genesis chapter 2, 12, verse 4. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old, and he left Haran. What I want you to know, Haran was a place between Ur and the promised land of Canaan. And he spent some time in Haran. Ur means light, so the word for Ur means light. So he was literally taking his light. He was in a place of light. He was taking his light with him, and he went and he split to Haran. Haran is thought of as a mountain, but it's really more than that. It's a high place or a lot of mountains. So it's a kind of a gathering place. Now, I'm going to make this make sense in a second. Genesis chapter 11, verse 31 says this. One day Terah, that's Abram's dad, his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, and his son Abram's wife, and his grandson Lot, his son Haran's child, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. He was headed for the land of Canaan, but he stopped at Haran, and what's the red word there? He settled there. Now here's one of the point I want to make. He leaves Ur, place of light, so he's taken his light with him, and he gets to Haran. It's a grouping. He gets to a place of another gathering place, and he settled there. So he gets called, He starts out on this place of faith, standing on these promises, and he gets to Haran, and he settles there. So far, so we can look back on our lives, and we can see where we get real fired up for the Lord, and we start moving in faith, and then all of a sudden we get to another place. See, he went from one comfort place, and he found another comfortable place. Did you get this? And he was 75 years old when he leaves this comfortable place, this gathering place. So he leaves his family, and he breaks a lot of his family. He's taken a lot. He's got Terah, his dad, is with him. Lot is with him. He's got his wife with him. So he's taken some of his family members. So he brought them out, and then he took them to another place, and they got comfortable there. That's what I'm trying to say. And I wrote in your notes, here's two things that are really important. The voices around us and the vision within us. Listen, he started listening to the voices around him. Terah was the one, his father said, let's settle down here. So he listens to his dad, and he gathers all of his people together, and he settles. He's promised Canaan, but he's beginning to settle in Haran. If you look back in your life and you're really honest with yourself, like I said, there will be times when you think, man, you were really hot for God, and you were moving in ways of God, you were moving in faith, and all of a sudden you got comfortable again. And you start listening to the voices around you. I tell you, one of the things I've done in my life is I started listening to the voices that told me I couldn't do things. I listened to people who told me that I was worthless. My uncle used to tell me all the time. I remember giving my heart to the Lord. I was hot-hearted for God. Then I moved into my house with my uncle. My uncle told me that I was horrible. I was never going to make anything out of myself. I started listening to those voices, and I began to settle. Sometimes our past can cause us to settle. Our false teachings can cause us to, there's a lot of things. Just getting too comfortable can cause us to settle. Getting a little bit of success can cause us to settle. But we settle back down. And we never get to where God promised he would take us because we get comfortable where we're at. Some years ago, I actually used the illustration. I was going to bring it in again, but I had two cups, both of them filled with water. One of them had a bunch of rocks in it, and the other one didn't have anything in it. So I started pulling the rocks out of the cup, and the water level started getting lower and lower and lower and lower. So it wasn't full anymore. So then I had my full cup, and I poured it into the cup that now was half full, and I could fill it up. I said, going to McDonald's, I go to McDonald's, I never get a Coke with ice. I always get a Coke without ice. Why? Because I get more Coke. Here's the point. The anger, the bitterness, the lust, the things that people told you about yourself, that stuff settles into our life, and it causes us to only get half full. We get rid of the anger, we get rid of the bitterness, we get rid of the hatred, and all of a sudden now we've got more capacity for God to fill us. I'm just going to be honest with you. Every time I've ever settled after leaving where God called me out, he put a calling on my life, and he called me out. Whenever I got to a place to settle, it was things like anger, bitterness, listening to the voices that told me that I would never be worth anything. I remember my uncle looking me in the face and saying, "You will never make anything out of yourself. You are a waste of space." I believed it. All of a sudden my grades started going down. I started acting out. I was angry. It's not so much you getting more of God. I hear people sing songs like more God, more love, more power in your life. And I know what they're saying, but it's not so much getting more of God. When you ask Christ in your heart, he'll give you everything. It's more about him getting more of you. It's not so much about getting more of God as it is him getting more of you. And as I started to get rid of the anger, the bitterness, hatred, all those old voices in my head, all of a sudden now I could be filled up again. And then all of a sudden, I'm not settling anymore. I can hear that promise. I can hear God speaking to me. I'll put it to you this way. I'm a guy of the 80s, okay? And there's a bunch of movies in the 80s that really spoke to me. And there's always a hero, and there's always somebody, like, okay, if I said Danielson, who was his mentor? Miyagi. Okay. Here's Mr. Miyagi, the guy that's in his voice. He's the new voice around him. You know, all the Cobra Kai telling him he couldn't do anything, couldn't be anything, and he was a wimpy little kid. But all of a sudden, Mr. Miyagi comes into his life and tells him, "Oh, Daniel-san." You know, it's one of my favorite things. Daniel-san, you good boy. You know. Or how about this one? Oh, come on, Rocky. And who's in his voice? Who's in his ear? Mickey, right? One of my favorite lines in all the movie. Get back in there, you fool! He didn't. Well, I'm cleaning it up for church. Get back in the ring, you fool! Mickey loves you. Well, you hear those kinds of voices in your head, all of a sudden you're like, okay, you know. How about this one? Now, some people would say that Luke's guy was Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I'm going to argue and say it was Yoda. And what was the famous line from Yoda? Oh, come on, somebody knows this. Am I the only child of the 80s? There is no... Huh?
Do or do not.
Do or do not.
There is no try.
There is no try. I love that. Someone else got it. Do or do not. I don't have I'm a horrible Yoda impression. What's that? Do or do not. There is no try. All right, yeah. Do or do not. There is no try. Anyway, so here he is trying to become a Jedi. He says, I can't do it. He says, do or don't do it or don't do it. There is no try. So this was the thing that motivated him to become this great Jedi. And if anybody's watching The Mandalorian, he comes in the last season and he kicks butt. There's the voices around us or the visions within us. Here's what I'm trying to say. I've listened to too many voices around me for my whole life. And I tell you what happens is I start to believe those voices and I settle. But what God has put in us is a vision. When are we going to stop listening to the voices? And I tell you what, when I first got here, when I first came to this church, and I'm just being real, I'm being honest, I had a pastor tell me, well, don't expect too much from that church. He said, they're old. The church is old. You'll be there to help bury it. That's what he told me. I called that guy not too long ago. I did, and this is, it's a couple years later and so forth, but I called that guy and I said, you know that church that you told me that was old, and the building was old, and that I was going, guess what? God's doing something there.
Amen.
It's not the voices around us. It's the vision within us. And God gave Abram a vision. He started to listen to Terah, the voices around him, and he settled. But it wasn't until he was 75 years old that he leaves that and begins to step into the promise, step into the vision that God gave him, and he heads to Canaan. Now, we know that through this vision, Jesus Christ was born. Through this vision, you and I have salvation through Jesus Christ. Had Abram not been faithful, there wouldn't have been a Jesus. Without a Jesus, we wouldn't have salvation. But God knew exactly who he was calling out and who he was putting a vision into. All I'm saying is this, gang. You want to find the awesome? Step out of that comfort zone. You really want to find the awesome? Go. You really want to find the awesome? Stand on the promises that God has given you. Man, when I said how many of you believe that are more than conqueror, you all had your hand raised. But have you lived like that? When I said how many believe that greater is he that is in me than he is in the world, you all had your hand raised. How many believe that? How many are walking in that? Nothing will get you out of the settled place more than standing on God's promises. And the only way you understand God's promises is by being in his word. I put in your notes at the bottom of this, Matthew chapter 16, verses 22 through 24. And I'm not going to preach another sermon, but I am going to end with this. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it. Here's Peter. Peter's the guy that always kind of, he's ready, fire, aim, God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. Why did he call him a stumbling block? Why did he call him something? Because he had a vision in mind. He knew what he needed to do. He knew that he needed to go to the cross, and he wasn't going to let the voices around him to hinder him from doing what God had called him to do. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. So he gives us a 3-point message on what we need to do to find the awesome. And it starts with deny yourself. And I tell you what, if you don't learn to deny yourself, you'll never get up to the taking up the cross part. If you don't learn to deny yourself and take up your cross, you'll never get to the following part. They build on each other. And it starts with denying yourself. What does it mean to deny yourself? And I gave this illustration some years ago, and I think of my little niece. My little niece, at the time, she's in her 30s now and has her own kids and stuff, but when she was little, she would like to take things and from me, and she would jam them in her mouth. She would take my keys and stick it in her ear and up her nose and in her eye and in her mouth, and she would chew on them. And I'm like, Chrissy, give that back to me. Give that back to me. And she jetted herself between a couch and a coffee table, and I couldn't reach her. And she's jamming my keys in her nose, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, how am I going to get to her? So I grabbed these little Smarties. You guys know what Smarties are, these little candies? And I hold them up. I said, here, Chrissy. Here, Chrissy. And she came out between the couch and the coffee table, and she dropped what she had in her hand because she found something of more value. It's letting go of the things down here because he has offered you something of more value. We got our hands so full of stuff, anger, bitterness, hatred, lust, all this. We're hanging on to this. And he's saying, I want to give you a vision. But you can't grab the vision until you let go of the stuff. That's exactly what Jesus said. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of man. And the moment you start hanging on to the things of man, you've lost the things of God. You got to let go of the things down here so you can reach up for something of more value. I'm telling you, the most valuable thing that God offers you is his promises. He has promised you salvation. He's promised you heaven. He has promised you a abundant life. Satan came to kill, steal, and destroy, but Christ came to give you what? And what? And more abundantly. I like his promises much better. Why are we settling for the things down here and hanging on to those things when he wants you to let go of those things so you can reach up for something? I did this once when I was, and I can't do it now because of COVID. I did this thing once when I was in church. There was a big congregation. And I was trying to illustrate this point, and so you guys remember the movie The Jerk? Okay, now I'm talking about the 70s, I think. But, at the very, very end, Steve Martin has like, all I need is this chair, but that's all I need, and maybe this paddle ball. And so now he's got a paddle ball in his hand, he's got a chair in his hand, but that's all I need, and maybe this lamp. And so he's picking up all this stuff as he's walking out, and he's going down the street, with his pants down to his ankles, and he's walking with this stuff in it. And I started thinking to myself, that's exactly what we do. So as I'm telling this story in the church, and I'm walking down the aisle, and I grab somebody's Bible. It says, all I need is this, but that's all I need. And then I grab somebody's purse, and I've got my hands full of all this stuff. And then I grab this bottle, and I put this in my mouth, and I'm thinking to myself, I hope this isn't breast milk. And so I've got all this stuff, and I'm hanging on to it, and then I dropped them, and I said, how can we hang on to all this when God has something so much better waiting for us? You want to find the awesome? Stop talking and start walking. You want to find the awesome? Stand on God's promises. You want to find the awesome? Just keep going. don't settle. Bow your heads.